I'm Teresa Coraggio, and this is Third Paradigm. Over the last year, I've read everything that Johnstone has written, which means pretty much daily. Located in Australia, she is refreshingly blunt, crude, funny, and astute in her geopolitical analysis. Her writing lends itself well to the succinct, pithy tweet, and she's also crafted some deeply human and gorgeously hopeful poetry. So it was surprising to me that this past week we came to a point of departure. In her episode, Free Speech is for Fighting the Empire, she outlined 3 steps. Step 1 is learning that the mainstream consensus worldview is a lie and that we've been fed power-serving propaganda since we were children about our society, our nation, our government, and our world. Most people haven't even made it to step 1 yet. Step 2 is getting clear on how we've been lied to. A lot of people who make it past step 1 get mixed up here. Many fall for dopey right-wing narratives about Jews ruling the world, globalist pedophile cabals, elite conspiracies to make all our kids transgendered or whatever, because their ideology prohibits them from clearly seeing the real underlying dynamics of capitalism and the empire building of their own government. They place far too much emphasis on things like vaccines and the future of transhumanism being used to someday create an Orwellian dystopia, because their worldview prohibits them from recognizing that we're already living in a power-serving, mind-controlled dystopia. Others simply don't go far enough in extracting the mainstream worldview from their minds and don't inquire deeply enough into what's really true. Plenty of self-identified socialists and anarchists still buy into bogus mainstream narratives about empire-targeted governments, or still buy into the power-serving dynamics of party politics. Step 2 takes a lot of hard, sincere, intellectually honest work sorting out fact from fiction. Step 3 is learning what to do about all this and beginning to take action. This means working to spread awareness of what's really going on and helping others to make it through steps 1 and 2. Because the only thing that ever leads to lasting positive changes in human behavior is an expansion of consciousness. The more people make it to step 3, the more people there are to help wake up everyone else. She ends with, "It's easy to see how others are misguided and delusional. It's much harder to see how we ourselves are misguided and delusional. The further away from ourselves we look, the easier it is for us to find fault. But it doesn't benefit anyone for us to find problems in the distant other. The closer to home we look, the more good we can do with what we find." In response, I posted in the comments, "In that same vein, perhaps we should be taking a closer look at anything we're not allowed to examine, like the World War II official narratives that the good guys won and the bad guys lost, that the banking oligarchy, who are the Jewish aristocracy, is the ring to rule them all. Whitney Webb's credible journalism on pedophilia as blackmail over global leaders, and that the virus was the trigger but the vaccine was the gun. I'm in full agreement with Caitlin on the issues she covers, having written my book on how to dismantle an empire. But her ridicule of those who take up the slack on issues she ignores is uncalled for. Like others, I've been dismayed that she lives in Australia and didn't cover the horrific takeover of Melbourne, the testing ground for Sado lockdowns. Caitlin may feel that nuclear Armageddon takes precedence over everything else. Others feel that way about climate Armageddon. Personally, I don't think we can get out of fulfilling the world's purpose that easily. I'm joking, but not. If there's meaning, and I think Caitlin and I agree there is, it's not for the world to go up in toxic smoke. And the idea that we can change the minds of the warmongers by marching seems to me naive. In sum, I think Caitlin should listen to a wise person who says, it's easy to see how others are misguided and delusional. It's much harder to see how we ourselves are misguided and delusional. In response, a commenter named Jean wrote, Jesu Christa, she can't do everything. I've always been so annoyed at the circular firing squad so prevalent among lefties. Geez, as if the woman isn't doing enough already, and as if they were doing anything useful. And now, because Caitlin dares to outline what she thinks is an effective method of building a movement on the left, the guns come out and we all get in our little narcissistic circles and start shooting, me included. Why not take what she says and grow up? I personally admire the hell out of this woman and every step towards liberation that she facilitates. Naysayers be gone. I replied, Caitlin's written many times, Jean, about how those who criticize empire should stop cannibalizing each other. I completely agree with her. What I'm critiquing is her doing exactly what she says she's against. In step 2, she says, many fall for dopey right-wing narratives about Jews ruling the world, globalist pedophile cabals. Their ideology prohibits them from seeing the real underlying dynamics of capitalism and the empire building of their own government. They place far too much emphasis on things like vaccines and the future of transhumanism being used to create an Orwellian dystopia. I don't think dismissing others with insults who are doing a lot of hard, sincere, intellectually honest work sorting out fact from fiction is building a movement. It's a cheap shot to not bother refuting their research and arguments, but lump them all together as dopey right-wingers. None of us can do all the research, but we can respect the people who are filling in the blanks between our own areas of expertise. Then Caitlin replied, History has vindicated my decision to focus on the dangers of nuclear brinksmanship over lockdowns in an irrelevant part of the world that have been over for a long time and had no major consequences, regardless of how dismayed that makes your feelings feel. I have a zero-tolerance policy for gibberish about Jews ruling the world in my comments section. I will not let this become a gathering place for that bullshit. First and final warning. I didn't respond, in part because I didn't want to give Caitlin any reason to ban me and therefore take my comment out and delete it so that people would have to guess at what kind of gibberish I was spouting. But 3 hours later, she added, also, I think Whitney Webb would take great exception to having her work characterized as asserting that the world is ruled by a cabal of pedophiles. Although she would ridicule it, my feelings feel sad for Caitlin because I feel like she burned a lot of bridges in that reply, and not in the way of Norman Finkelstein's new book, I'll Burn That Bridge When I Get to It. First, by calling her home country of Australia an irrelevant part of the world. I keep reading that to see if I can take it another way, but I haven't figured that out. Second, to say that the lockdowns have been over for a long time and had no consequence. I posted my comment in 2 places as a reply to the top comment and then 100 comments down. In reply to my second posting, someone called the Black Flag wrote, I remember seeing on the news the ranks of grim, masked-visaged police surrounding an apartment block in Melbourne, mainly comprising poor people and immigrants, and effectively sealing off the whole building. Why? Because of a few COVID cases. People inside were desperate, but the officials didn't care. I knew then this was a war that primarily affected the working and lower classes. The Ukrainian narrative flows seamlessly from this. The new class war, the 10%, backed by the new liberal left light, fascist class versus the rest. Media considers true leftists and rightists as scum now, as being the same. I answered with, yes, it's a heartbreaking story that I'm ashamed to say I wasn't aware of until one of my viewers from Australia asked me to watch Battleground Melbourne. I cried through it and cried relaying one of the testimonies in my video, Down Under, Torn Asunder. For every person that Topher Field interviews in Battleground Melbourne is talking about the consequences of the lockdown, the economic devastation, the isolation, the lack of necessities, the depression, the suicides of which everyone says that they know someone. Some of the most horrifying footage is of the protest when they finally have had enough and how the police kettle them into a canyon where they can only escape in a narrow funnel where they're beaten. Finally, a group surges and they break through. My Australian viewer, Maria, said that it made her question whether they had been intentionally disarmed when Australia passed anti-weapons laws in response to a mass shooting in order to make them the testing ground for how much people would tolerate. If activists were to answer Caitlin's call to march against nuclear weapons, would they have that same police brutality that they'd be met with in Australia? Or would the police not care because it wouldn't really make a difference? The best collation that I've seen of the consequences has been Margaret Anna Alice's 4-part series, Down Under Edition, which she puts into one post that I have linked in the Substack version. Margaret introduces this with, given that Australia and New Zealand are serving as the trial run for one world totalitarianism, and that I have several loyal subscribers from Down Under, I decided to dedicate this issue to all you Aussies and Kiwis out there. The petitions, videos, and articles focus on the present tyranny, while the cultural portion, book, movie, show, and music recommendations, as well as the poem, reminds us of the beauty, humor, and resilience of Australians and New Zealanders. I hope the latter will assuage the souls of the despondent while inspiring the downtrodden to draw strength from their rugged heritage as they shatter their chains, depose the despots, and restore their liberties. But the more long-term consequences of the lockdown has been the vaccine. Australia is one of the most vaccinated countries in the world and is experiencing tragedy on an unprecedented scale. And I can post links and data to that if Caitlin is interested. Margaret and Caitlin agree, however, that the official narrative of World War II is not to be questioned. It's the only place where Margaret and I have disagreed, although she didn't issue me a first and final warning when I made my points. So let's look at the gibberish that Caitlin characterized as the Jews rule the world. What I actually said was the banking oligarchy, who are the Jewish aristocracy, is the ring to rule them all. Let's examine that. Who are the oligarchies? Michael Hudson characterizes them as 3 types. First, FIRE, finance, insurance, and real estate. Then MIC, military-industrial complex. And finally, OGAM, oil, gas, and mining. Of those 3, in rock, paper, scissors, FIRE wins every time. And within FIRE, finance beats out insurance and real estate. And then if we look at different forms of finance, banking is the one that creates the money, especially at the level of the Fed, the World Bank, and the IMF. So banking is certainly the ring to rule them all. Second, do groups exist in any way that can or should be named? In her article, terms she uses are Russia, Sweden, the US. She's not talking about land masses or the whole populations, but using that as a shorthand for unnamed officials acting within those countries. She uses Westerners and Soviets to distinguish groups of people assumed to have common beliefs and characteristics. When she says an American UN official, she's using a word describing two continents to say that this person represents the interests of the United States, whoever that is. Caitlin names the U.S. military and the U.S. empire as the culprits for the Nord Stream bombing. Is that a more specific group on which to lay blame than me talking about the Jewish banking aristocracy? Personally, I would have talked about Biden, Blinken, and the Nod, Victoria Nuland, as the people who made those decisions, and also as the entire Senate who voted to make sure that Nord Stream 2 was dead in the water. Those would be individuals who all made decisions and should bear responsibility for that. The rationale for why no one in power should ever be described as Jewish is that this will incite irrational violence against random Jews around the world as the only race or religion that has been continually victimized in a history that we're not allowed to question. Does Caitlin's blame of the U.S. empire mean that she's putting at risk every U.S. citizen around the world as a possible victim of irrational violence? Are we not capable of seeing the difference between someone who is a cog in the machine and those who have designed the machine and still control it? To end, I want to analyze Caitlin's 3 steps as the formula for every cult of superiority, which is how I describe every organized religion. In step 1, we figure out that we have all been lied to, and most have not gotten that far. So by virtue of having read it, we're a member of that elite. We're a member of the few who can actually see. In step 2, swaths of the seeing few get winnowed out. We're told who we can feel superior to, who don't see the real underlying dynamics of capitalism and the empire building of their own government. Those distracted by vaccines, globalist cabals, transhumanism, and dopey right-wing narratives about Jews ruling the world. Instead, capitalism rules the world, which is a faceless entity self-organized by underlying dynamics no one designed or controls. You want to change it? Well, you can't. It's an empire with no one at the top. So stop looking at the world and pretending that there's a hierarchy of those claiming ownership of the capital or the assets that back the money, which is how I define capital. Focus instead on the empire building of your own government, for which every U.S. person is at fault. In the enlightened step 3, if you've rejected the dope think of step 2, you're now anointed to go out and spread the gospel of Caitlin. You can help others see through the lies, but not all of the lies, only the official approved lies and not the ones that are off limits. So you're now one of the apostles, and you can go forth and convert others. In every system of superiority, there's a threat and a bribe. The threat is that if you express the opinions of the condemned, you too will be ridiculed and ostracized. First and final warning. The bribe is that if you accept the authority of the one who's making the rules, you too can be one of the smart kids and you can look down your nose at your inferiors. Caitlin, I think we are all at step 1. None of us knows how deep the lies really go. And we need each other to be able to point out our blind spots. I have been really grateful to you for pointing out my blind spots and illuminating the ones that I haven't known about on Empire. I think that we all need that. We all need to have the humility to be able to take what other people are doing and look at them for the hard, sincere, intellectually honest work sorting out fact from fiction. That's the only way we're going to break free. To follow this up, of course, I will recommend Down Under, Torn Asunder, and also When Did You Stop Being Wrong? And on the Substack version, I'll also link We Need to Agree to Agree. Thank you for watching.